Today we get the front brake caliper mounted on our homemade leafer suspension on this motorcycle, which had some mental challenges involved in it, which I'll talk about later in the video. Also, the building of this entire leafer suspension is covered in a previous video, which I'll link in the description. Alright, so I've been playing around on the computer trying to design a piece to sort of extend out the linkage on the front suspension there to include a little piece here off of which can be attached our brake caliper. But this is proving to be a little bit more difficult than I anticipated, and so I'm going old school. I'm going analog here, and I'm going to just partially do this and sort of, at the very least, mock something up in real life here to get all the angles correct. So I'm going to start by transferring this because I know my bolt holes are correct here, my spacing. So I'm going to start with that, and we're going to just start and cut out a rough piece here. Alright, so I've got to cut out some pieces around here so I can fit around this bolt and this piston. Alright, there we are. Now we can fit around those pieces, and I should be able to screw this on. Alright, so there we are. Our bolt holes and everything line up. We got around those things, and now get an idea at least of how this is going to line up with the actual bike. Alright, to do that I'm going to stick this guy on here. Then we know our axle for our bike is actually like right over here. That whole plate should end somewhere up in there, so I should be able to cut out a piece here. Alright, I've got the wheel off the bike. I've got the whole front end off the bike. I've got it up here on the table. We've also got a little link here. I've swapped that out for a different link that is longer. So here's the old link. You can see how this guy would have been in here like that. So I redesigned this, cut out a longer piece on the CNC machine, and now we've got this. And it extends out here so that we can get coverage over onto this plate here. I've still got a gap in here. So you can see there's still a gap in there, and a decent sized one at that, because I've got like another 1/4 inch plate piece here, and that slides in there pretty perfectly. I essentially have to weld all 3 of those together to make this thing work. And right now I'm just working on getting this thing aligned to where I like it, to where I think it will work. So that means this brake pad, making sure the brake pad is on the rotor. Basically I'm trying to do a combination of align this brake pad while simultaneously aligning these 3 plates up here. And once I get that to where I want it, we'll mark stuff, and then we'll take this apart and weld it together. Alright, so I've traced this out on the back side that corresponds to the back side of our caliper here. So when these are lined up, you can see that mark follows this guy right here, and then we pan out here, we shift out towards the other side here, and that's what lines up with the extension on our linkage that's over here. So that's my general shape. I'm going to go ahead and cut this section out. Alright, so at this point, I've gone ahead, I've cut out this 1/4 inch piece that's going to fill that gap in between. Drilled a hole in it and put a bevel on that hole because I'm going to plug weld that thing onto the other plate. This guy right here, this will go on top, approximately like that, and we'll fill that hole right there with weld, and these two will be welded together. I'm also going to go around the sides here and weld stuff together as well. But we've also got to weld to this guy here. All right, I've got those 2 pieces clamped up here. I'm going to go ahead and blast a tack on there, and then we'll test fit it back on the bike here and make sure everything is lined up where we want it. So that's it, just a couple little tacks on there. And starting to get an idea of what it will look like eventually. I'm gonna go ahead and put it back on the caliper. I can mount it up over here. Yeah, I think that's where we want to be. Exactly. Plug weld this guy, then we'll try and figure out mounting it to this thing, and then we'll figure out finish welding everything around on the edges. Pretty fun, man. Look at that thing. All right, I'm gonna go through and sort of fill this in a bit more. All right, now it's time to marry these two together. So I'm just gonna place this guy over the top of that one. I'm gonna clamp this thing down, and then we're going to get to welding, man. All right, so we got it clamped up, and again, I'm just gonna go ahead and put a tack on there, and then we'll test fit it before we weld it. It looks pretty good. The way the brake pads lay on the rotor where they hit like that looks pretty ideal to me. When the axle's tightened up. Yeah, so there are several things that need to tighten up here, but I think we'll be in great shape once we get this thing tightened down and everything is fully welded. So speaking of which, let's go ahead and weld this guy up. I weld all three of these little layers together on the outside here. We got some nice pretty welds on this guy. I'm quite happy with the TIG welding now that I know how to do it. It is quite an art. Beautiful, beautiful art. Let's get this on the wheel. All right, let's see if we can get this brake caliper on there. That might actually work, dude. It's crazy. I need to shorten these bolts. All right, let's get this bike back together. And there it is on the bike. You can kind of get an idea of how this is gonna work and all that stuff. So, works basically like a normal brake, except on this particular suspension setup, and this was the sort of limitation. This wasn't the most elegant solution, but the only solution I could really come up with. Which was because when you brake on this, it's going to grab the caliper and it's going to rotate. It's going to want to rotate that way because the wheel is going to be spinning like this. It'll grab it. The caliper will want to spin with the wheel and pull this way, which will pull this down, which will compress the suspension, which will lead to the dreaded brake dive, where the suspension compresses like that when you use the front brakes. It's not uncommon in older motorcycles and stuff like that. It is a common engineering thing to try and overcome that. We just couldn't overcome it this time. A better solution in my mind is mounting the caliper in front of this fork leg, so it would be up here, but as you can see, there's absolutely no room to mount the caliper over there. What that would have allowed us to do is attach a lever and or brace essentially to the fork leg here that allowed the caliper to move. But when the brakes were applied, it would essentially limit the caliper's travel that way, and it would put all that force onto the leg instead of onto the suspension and that would limit the brake dive. So I think that would have been a much better solution. This, not so great. I possibly could put some sort of lever thing on the back here that attaches to the caliper that does the same thing, except the physics on that and how to make that work, I'm not exactly sure, because you've got to have a lever with multiple sort of hinging points on it that can move like that, so that the caliper itself can move with the suspension. But if you have that, if you have two hinges, the hinges are essentially going to do absolutely nothing in terms of providing resistance to this caliper traveling once a brake is applied, because it will travel and those hinges will move, and it will just sort of collapse on itself. Whereas if you had the exact same setup over here, when the caliper goes to travel with the brakes applied, it will try to travel this way, and that hinge thing will just straighten out, and then bam, it will be a stopping point, and it will limit the ability of that caliper to travel, and that's what will provide a solid sort of braking force and keep the caliper from applying a bunch of brake dive force to the suspension. That would have been better, but this is what we got, and we'll see. It'll just be one of those things of you have to know when you're riding it and get used to riding it that way. I am just super stoked that we've got a front brake on this thing, period. I think that's pretty awesome. The alternative, which a lot of guys go with on choppers, is to remove the front brake entirely, and I wanted to put in some extra effort and try and get a front brake on this thing and make it work. And so we've got one that will work. It will provide braking force. It just won't be awesome in terms of, it will have some negative aspects to it as well. I'm very happy with this as a first effort on making a vintage front suspension, or a front suspension, period. And that's kind of the point with these things, is pushing my limits. I mean, the reason I tried to do the brake caliper and the shock on the other side and all of this thing in general is because I've never done it before, and I really wanted to see if I could do it. And so far so good. I have my doubts on how this is going to actually function. It seems to work here in the garage, but will it work going down the road, and how well? I know it will work, but how well will it work? Will it provide me a nice cushy ride or anything close to that? I mean, or am I going to hate this thing? That's really the question at this point. So I'm pretty confident in the seat suspension. I think that's going to be a nice cushy ride, surprisingly. But this front end thing, still not sure about it. But I enjoy challenging myself. Challenges are a lot of fun, and the best part of them is when you come out the other side and you're like, whoa, I just made this thing. So, and you're proud of it. So anyways, thanks for watching this video. Keep on wrenching on your own projects. We'll see you next time.